I'm Mary Isbell, and this is week 3 of our Open Pedagogy Project series. This week, we are talking about attribution statements and making attribution statements for work that you're remixing or your own original work. So this is the most commonly used set of instructions. I see it pointed to from all sorts of different tutorials on putting together an attribution statement and understanding the components of an attribution statement. So after sharing this with faculty before our meeting, we now know what questions sort of still linger after looking at this. Now, in order to do this, I turned on Hypothesis for this site. So over here on the side, you can see that I created a private annotation group called Open Education at U New Haven. And that is where I saved these questions that faculty were having. I'm just a nerd, so I did this. I wanted to show how Hypothesis makes it easy to talk about the details on a page. The first is a question about this ideal attribution for this image. Here's the title, that it's by this creator, and it gives the license. And so the question here is why, when we click on this user, we see that the username on Flickr is Tval, but Timothy Vollmer is the creator, and that's the actual name, we imagine, of this Flickr user. So the question is, why wouldn't you use the person's actual name instead of the Flickr username? And I haven't yet to find any kind of hard and fast rule about this. A person who has a life on the internet might be on multiple platforms and have different or even contradictory profiles or personae on different sites. And so associating it with the Flickr persona is what we're doing here because we're using an image from Flickr. So that could be. So it's also, I think, interesting to consider that you might be remixing work by someone whose true identity you don't know. All right, the next question has to do with the difference between these two images and their attribution statements. So the question is whether this image, which has the same title as the image it's been based on, and it has just been switched to black and white or desaturated. Why is this different than this image, which has more substantial changes and has a new title? And the way to think about this is that there might be some debate about when you might want to rename something or not rename it. So in this case, the person who used this earlier image here and desaturated it decided it still deserved the same title and the same creator, but they just wanted to make a note that it was desaturated from the original. Someone else might think that changing the color in that way on an image was a creative act and wanted to title it differently. In fact, the creative act could be giving it that different title. And as long as that image didn't have an ND license, so as long as that image allowed derivatives, that would be okay. The confusion here seemed to be that this is a modification and this is a derivative, and there are differences between those two things. But as far as the licenses are concerned for Creative Commons, these are both technically derivatives. Changing anything about the image constitutes an adaptation, making what you've done a derivative. And Creative Commons has an FAQ page, which is quite long and has lots of really good answers to specific use cases. But here, this section kind of clarifies the things you can do if the image that you're working with has a CC by ND license. If you can't create a derivative, then the only things you would be allowed to do are change the file type or print the image if it was in digital format. So you can change the format, and you can also change perhaps even the size of it, as long as it's not creating a separate new work. So what you see down here is under US copyright law, mechanical reproduction of a work into a different digital format is unlikely to create a separate new work. Consequently, digitally enhancing or changing the format of a work, absent some originality, such as expressive choices made in the enhancement or the encoding, will not likely create a separate work for copyright purposes. So it could be a tricky territory, but for the most part, if you have a non-derivative image, you can change the file type and you can change the size of it. Coming back to this though, both of these images are technically derivatives, and the person who is adapting them, creating those derivatives, is making a choice about how they title it. Do they keep the same title with a note about the modification, or do they create a new title and give their own name? All right, so now here's this final question, which is, lastly, before we go, is there anything else I should know before I use this? And it's this line that we got a little tripped up on. When you access the material originally, did it come with any copyright notices? A notice that refers to the disclaimer of warranties, or a notice of previous modifications? When I first looked at this page, I hadn't encountered anything like that before because I hadn't done a lot of work with open resources, but I've now encountered this very often. So this is quite common. I think the best way to understand this is to look at a couple of examples of openly licensed resources that contain copyrighted components. So this is one that a professor in the School of Health Sciences encountered last summer through this fellowship. And this faculty member wanted to use this resource to create a case study. So we could look really quickly at like what the actual resource looks like and how you navigate through it. So you have figures and such, and essentially text broken up into pages that you're going to kind of navigate through. So when we look at the acknowledgments for this resource, you can see that it has its author. It has, except for third-party materials and otherwise stated, this content is made available under a Creative Commons Attribution non-commercial share-alike license. So a fairly restrictive license, but it does allow for derivatives. So anything that would remix this would have to have the same license, a CC BY NCSA license. And we want to look at all of the material that is acknowledged below that is proprietary and used under license that's not subject to Creative Commons license. And that's basically every figure and a video, right? So what this faculty member had to do was replace those images or remove them in order to move forward with her project. So that's why in the early stages, when we talk about searching for OER, you might want to be looking at this early on to say, is this something that I can remix in its entirety? Or if I remix it, is there going to be something that I can't include? It's not the worst thing in the world to have to replace figures, and that can be done using some of the guidance we talked about in the images video. But that's something to keep in mind. Now, why would someone make an open educational resource and include all of this copyrighted material? If they want it to be shared, why are they doing this? That's a question that I think many of you have had. And I think the answer has to be they wanted the book to be open and freely usable and weren't as concerned with those who would be remixing it as they were with including content that they had permission to include. So they were able to secure permission to include all of these things, and that made the book richer for them. And for anyone who wants to visit this particular website to use this resource as is. And so you make that decision because without these figures, they think the resource is not as strong. And I think that holds for a couple of other examples I found. So one faculty member this summer is thinking about using this textbook on memorials. And when you go down and look at the initial license is here, but then when you go down to the metadata, you see a lot of additional details about what can't be included if you remix it. And so you have an attribution share alike license, except where otherwise noted. You have the images contained within the book retain their copyright or original Creative Commons licenses and can only be reused under their respective licenses. Additionally, clarification on some content that came from The Guardian and some content that came from the Queensland War Memorial. And in that case, it's because they wanted to include this information from The Guardian, but The Guardian wasn't putting a CC BY license on its content. So this is what's allowed. And that means that anyone who uses this, who remixes this book and retains that Guardian content would just include this same note about what's allowed, right? Just to clarify that it's permitted under their terms of use. Same for this one. I think the disclaimer here has to do with the fact that this was published on their Pressbooks network. And so the logo for the university appears on the book technically. And so they're making sure that that logo is not, by being included there, included in the CC BY license, because they don't want the logo to be reused in that way. So there's lots of just protections here for components that they want to keep protected. Again, I think the thing that's happened in this book is that the authors have decided that they are more interested in having a really strong product here that has all of the images that they would most ideally want to include. And so they're more concerned with that than they are with the ease of remixing for those downstream. That's how you might think about it. And here's another that has a similar dynamic. So here we have a book about an artist, and it's a very restrictive license. No derivatives is an important thing that's added in here. And I think, the reason is because they've worked closely with the artist's materials, and they're interested in making an open textbook. They're not wanting derivatives. Here it's very explicit. No derivatives are allowed. You can use this book, you can download this book, but you are not to change this book. So you might even say that this book is almost as good as no derivatives, but that's not really the case. You can take the text of this book and remix it as much as you want. It's the images in this book that can't be remixed. In this whole ecosystem of open educational resources, there are people who are most interested in making a free textbook available and not in the potential downstream remixing of it. What I want to do now is look at how you would go about making the attribution to apply to whatever you're working with. So if you're making a print resource that you want to apply an image to, you can go to the downloads page for Creative Commons and find the license image that fits what you're doing, and just download whatever file type you want and add it onto the image. I would encourage you to also include the text from this page, right? So next to the image. And I'll show you actually how I did that here. Remember, I showed in the previous video that this was an image that I found really helpful and inspiring, and it had a clear image announcing its license and the appropriate text, which made it really easy for me to find it, find the file, and think about remixing it. So this was my first attempt at remixing it. And then I further refined it. So at first I had a box up here, and essentially what I had done is I just downloaded the image that I needed and I uploaded it to Canvas, and then I used this site. I think I did it as explicitly as copying exactly this text and using it as a template to create the text here. What I did for this image is I put hyperlinks in here. If it was an image, a static image or a printout, the URL is kind of lost because the hyperlink is not accessible. But I'm pretty sure when I download this as a PNG file and put it on a website that these hyperlinks go away. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to make yet another version of this image that does an even better job of attribution. I'm going to use the more recent tools that are out there because Creative Commons is always trying to make it easier to do this work. The image is going to be on the site with an attribution statement. So I think maybe what would be really helpful here is for me to get to the site where I want this image to live. And this, I'm going to say final design without license. It's going to have a caption, and the caption will be my place to share with you visitors to the site what's going on with it. So let me do that. Final design without license. License will be added elsewhere. I'm just going to save that, and now that I've saved that other version, I'm going to delete this. All right, so now I want to download this as a PNG file, and I just want to download this one. So only one of those pages. All right, so now we're looking at the dashboard for a book I've created, which is an open edition of the Confessions of Nat Turner built with Pressbooks. And I want to go to Organize. All right, so what I want is About Transforming Humanities Texts. That's the page that I want to put this image on. I'm going to edit that page, and I'm going to go to the visual editor here. I said add the cycle for THT here with an invitation to join. So I'm just going to put above here, add media, upload a file, and what I'm going to do here is say cycle. I'm going to give all of this metadata for the image. Cycle for transforming. This is a very similar interface on WordPress when you upload images. I want the caption to be the text that I'd worked on before. So I'm going to go back to Canvas and zoom in and grab that text. See, here's where attributions come in. So adapted by you. But I'm going to say, there it is, Bell. CC by is my drop down option. And the author URL, I'm going to have to get back in here and click on it. See what the link is. Here we go. Put the link for the author in here. The author is an organization. It's not an individual person. I'm not going to put a URL for me here. But the source I'm going to be giving is the original source. So let's look at the link again. So let's see how this works. Insert into front matter. There it is. The way that I was inserting the caption didn't give me a chance to put a hyperlink, but now that it's here, I can. So, content development cycle. I want to put a hyperlink for that. And I want to make sure that that link opens in a new tab. And I want to also give the link to the BC Campus Indigenization Project. So I'm going to go back here and remind myself what that link is. And put that over here. This is doing the extra work to make this as easy for people to find the source as possible. And I'm saying open link in a new tab just because I don't want to direct people away from my site. I want to let them get to this information, but not leave the page entirely, or not essentially be forced to leave the page entirely to have that information. So now let me view it again. Now we have links to get to the content development cycle, the original image, if anybody wants to get there, or to learn more about the BC Campus Indigenization Project, which is the sort of point, like the point of giving attribution in this way is that it says, I adapted this from this other project, and you can easily get to that other project to learn more. And that's why you would take the time with giving attribution with this much care. If you just put this, people are going to have to Google around to find it and potentially not land on the ideal page. So taking the time with that is really helpful. So all of that did take some time. It definitely took some time. Coming up with the text of your attribution statement is just the beginning. The next step is, where is it going to be? And I'm just going to show you on the Open Pedagogy site how I made sure, we're on the website right now, and I want you to see where the attribution statement is right now. At the very bottom of the site, it says this website called Open Pedagogy is by Mary Isbell, and it's licensed under CC BY. All right, if you want to see how to add this to your website, because this is part of kind of footer material, then I'll show you. I'm logged into OpenLab. If I go up here, I can get to the dashboard. And I'm using the Fluida theme, which I will talk about with the platforms video to come. But if you go into Appearance and Customize when using many themes, but Fluida especially gives you this sort of instant view of changes you're making on lots of things that you can customize. And so what we want to do to get down to this lower section here is click on General and then Structure. So it's not exactly intuitive where this is, but you see how it says Custom Footer Text. I was able to come in here and change this. And I just created this manually when I put it in, but if I wanted to, I could go back to the license chooser. This is again the beta version of the license chooser, so you can follow this URL to get to this one if you like it. I know the license I need. I want a CC by 4, and then the title of the work is Open Pedagogy. I'm the creator, and this could be copied rich text like this, or I'm kind of curious what changes if I use the HTML here. So I'm just going to copy this and go back over here. I don't have to save this if I don't like it, but I'm going to try to put this in and see how that changes things. So it puts the image at the bottom of the page. So I think that's fine. I'll keep that and I'll publish. On my first year writing page, I am building this with students, and so the whole website similarly has this attribution statement. This website, Seminar in Academic Inquiry and Writing by Mary Isbell, is licensed under CC BY 4.0. Featured projects are individually licensed, and these are the projects that my students have created. And so all of my student creations, they have to decide for themselves how they license their work. And if they wanted to do that, they could include HTML at the bottom of their page. And that HTML generator that we were looking at a second ago would be much easier for them to use. Yes, I know the license I need. Say your student wants to do a very restrictive license, for example. So here's the rich text, which includes the hyperlink. So that's nice. Here's the HTML that you can put on the bottom of the site that will also, I believe, include the image. So let's just see what happens if on a post on OpenLab, I put the license. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard. I'm going to create a new post. Testing license. Content, that is great. And then down here, I'm going to add a content block. In WordPress, you can add a content block that is HTML. So I'm actually just going to search for that. Custom HTML. Boom. Preview. There it is. And so when I preview that page, it's not a full post right now, but this is a student's work, and the very bottom of that page would say how it was licensed. And that's by using the HTML. It could also just be copy pasting the rich text, but when you use the HTML, it adds in the image and includes all the hyperlinks to the actual license itself. But that was here too. So put these side by side. Let's see. All right, so you have this one, and this one came from just copying and pasting the rich text, and this one came by copying and pasting the HTML. This is not the simplest thing in the world, but once you get the hang of it, it gets a lot easier. And it's more challenging when you are adapting individual components. So if each image you've made changes to, instead of just using it as it was originally, then your work gets a little harder. So using the images as is, you'll be able to use this tool, right? It's only when you start adapting it that it gets a little complicated. Thanks for watching.